who is a real man? The real man respects women, understands is gender equality, understands gender equality, stands for gender equality, and also every man has to, or a young man needs to be a pro-feminist.
Welcome to Back to the Future podcast. My name is Victor Sathya, and I talk with brilliant minds and hearts of people who want to uproot and transform the current health and wellness paradigm. Dr. Sathya Doraiswamy is a medical doctor, board certified in public health and board certified in lifestyle medicine. He has received diplomas in applied population research, applied statistics, and human resource management. He works for the United Nations Population Fund and has over 20 years of experience in academia, government, and NGOs. His special interests include refugee health, sexual and reproductive health, and strengthening health systems, particularly in fragile settings. In this episode, we talk about the systemic neglect of gender equality in allopathic medicine and the need and opportunity for the lifestyle medicine advocates to rectify this disparity. We underscore the importance of cultural and political sensitivity in healthcare interventions and the need for early integration of public health education into the medical curricula. Dr. Sathya talks about the spectrum of prevention and the different levels it has, and shows that in Western medicine there is very little understanding of community diagnosis and community treatment. We finalize by projecting 50 years into the future and how an optimistic and a pessimistic scenario would look. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we have Dr. Sathya Doraiswamy. Thank you so much for being here, my friend.
My pleasure, Victor. Thanks for having me.
So a few days ago, I was in the middle of a discussion with prominent scientists, researchers in the field of happiness, economy, and capitalism. And they were talking about how governments take decisions, and an important policymaker from Greece intervened and said, governments don't make decisions based on expert advice. They take decisions and then hire experts to justify the decisions they made. Everyone went silent. I think she has a big point, and you work for the UN. What is your impression on how decisions are made? And of course, I know it's much more complex than that, and I don't expect that we take a black or white stance for anything during our conversation, but just wanted to open with this possibility.
Oh, I think it's very interesting perspective in terms of governments making decisions, right? So, but we have to understand the governments are also under a lot of pressure on multiple quarters. But the most important kind of stakeholder that they want to appeal to is the citizens of their country. So, basically they are based on an electorate, assuming the governments that we are talking about are democracies. So countries and governments will kind of prioritize what will add to their vote bank. So they're really looking at specific constituencies and making sure what they do appeases the population. And again, while this is a broad kind of a statement, it also depends on the level of awareness and the level of participation of the people in the democratic processes and how much they are aware of their rights. And you would actually see that also varying from country to country in terms of the level of awareness among people. And that could have been willfully kind of withheld for over time, or it's just that the country has been affected by shocks and various forms, and most specifically conflicts and so on, where the population is often deprived of the right level of education, also to be able to make the right demands based on their rights. So it's basically, a complex milieu that we operate in, and therefore the decisions are not always based on science and is not always in the best interest of everyone, but mostly in what will likely get the electorate going. And where the electorate demands development and where the electorate demands the best, for the people in return, likely that the governments will also kind of do that. So it's a two-way process, the people and the government. So, yeah.
So I think you have a unique perspective in the sense that you've lived in many countries. How many countries have you lived in?
Yeah, so this is actually the 10th country I'm living in. So yeah, I've seen different types of government, and of course, I've traveled many more countries and read many more in my various jobs. But in terms of living, this is the 10th country I'm living in.
Yeah, so you were trained as a physician, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And I would like to get your the story about how when traveling the world and working in so many countries, this idea of complexity build up inside of you, where you are now unable to see things as a black and white perspective, but rather a shade of grace, and it basically for everything in the world, everything's
Right.
so complex and so intertwined. How was this complexity emerge out of so many different experiences that you've had all over your life?
Yeah, so with the complexity, what I would also kind of say in terms of the variability that you see in different countries. And again, I kind of draw in from the first response to the question, right? We're really dealing with two entities here. One is basically the government and the people. And in democracies, you would think that the it's by the people for the people, so it's really driven by people. But in many instances, it is not the case. And some of the countries that I worked in, which are developmentally backward, are countries where there is questionable level of democracy. So therefore, what we want to say is that in any country that you work in, there are two kinds of sensitivities that one needs to have. So one is the culture sensitivity, which is basically you understanding the people and the milieu that you work in. And then the other is the political sensitivity, because that's where you liaise with the governments. So what we try to do in the work that I do through the United Nations is you work for the people through the government. So basically, you need to kind of keep both stakeholders by your side, and you need to understand and work around that. So the more the culturally sensitive and politically sensitive you are, the likelihood of success in working in such a country becomes much higher. And where there is a perfect democracy, where the people and the government's thinking are in alignment, then it becomes a lot more kind of simpler, in that the culture influences the politics, and the politics tends to influence the culture, and it's vice versa. But where they are not in sync, then it becomes a bit more challenging, in that you have to bring in at least another player here, which is basically the civil society, because ultimately we want to reach people. So the civil society becomes an important player in terms of advocacy for rights, but also as an important service provider in those marginalized populations and people who are often left behind and marginalized for specific reasons. Then we have to find ways of working through the civil society to reach them. So all in all, the question, the response to your question is, as long as you're able to handle the cultural sensitivity and the political sensitivity in the country that you're working in, it's very likely that you will kind of succeed in your mission.
Mm. And how has your understanding about the complex nature of politics, of health, of basically everything built inside of you over time? I'm very interested about how we open our minds, but also we weave ideas, knowledges, doctrines into we try to be a coherent whole.
Mhm. Yeah, but maybe I can walk through my experience in terms of how the kind of horizon opens up over time, and nothing teaches like experience. And in every place, even though you go to serve and share your knowledge, every location and every place that you are in, gives you a deep sense of learning. And as you pointed out earlier, I actually started my career as a clinician. So as a clinician, you're really looking at working in a clinic and specified hours and treating individual patients, and you see that. And the learning that comes with that is also beyond a point. You kind of get a pattern of diseases and conditions. Right. So therefore, you ask yourself a question in terms of, what can I do when you're seeing this kind of a pattern of diseases? Is there something that I can actually do in advance of people coming to the clinic, so that the need for them to come to the clinic kind of reduces? So therefore, that's when the whole spectrum of public health comes in. And basically, I trained to be a primary healthcare physician. So the place where I started working first and in rural Tamil Nadu in India was a rural district primary health center. So which was, I had a catchment population of about 27,000 people. The learning that I had was quite immense in the sense that, apart from being a clinician in the morning, in the afternoons, we had a schedule of doing a specific public health kind of an intervention. So you learn from that experience and actually see how much there is a respect that you actually gain with people. The more you interact with them and the more you go into the community and have a community discussion, and what we sometimes call within public health is community diagnosis and a community treatment rather than an individual diagnosis and treatment. So you bring that learning into your thinking, and then you take your thinking into the next level, where you now have where I started working in refugee health in particular. So basically, you again see a pattern in terms of marginalized populations and people who are often left behind. So in terms of how you need to provide services to them. So you're learning. Victor, are you still there? Victor, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a brief pause. Right. So, the experience that you gain from your previous venture, then you kind of take it on to the next level. So what you learn from a specific group of population, as I mentioned, refugees whom I started working with, made me understand about a specific marginalized population. So in the next experience that I go in, so there are people affected by natural disasters, or people who belong to an opposition kind of a party and who are marginalized in a specific location. So how do we reach them? So, and then in another country, you deal with patients who survive fistula, obstetric fistula. So again, they become a marginalized population, and then how do you reach them? So an experience that you gain from one location kind of helps you to take it to the next level. So in spite of the complexities, in terms of the diversities, I would still say that you learn from patterns, and you learn from one setting, a group of people that you work in, and then kind of take that to the next setting that you go into.
Yeah, let's pause in that point for a second, because I think that there's a big thing here. Like in health professions, like
Yeah.
the focus is on the individual, on the patient, and on public health, you tend to see the whole picture. However, when you're trained in one or the other, there's basically not much of things they have in common, both in the theory when you're learning, but also in the practice when you're doing public health or individual consultations one-on-one. So how do you think that in your case, because I don't see a lot of health professionals having these two perspectives working all the time, how has that in your life really enriched how one really should be a mirror of the other and not separate realms?
Right. It needs a deep sense of understanding. So, the inspiration for me for public health actually came as part of my medical curriculum itself. So within the medical curriculum, so you have a specific subject called social and preventive medicine, as it's called in India, where I got trained. But in other places, it's sometimes called community medicine. In others, it's just simply called public health. So it's kind of has a very similar kind of a thinking. So the basic inspiration for a clinician on the social and the preventive side of medicine should come on very early as part of the training itself and as part of the medical curriculum itself. If you don't do that, and if you just train a clinician just on the diseases and treating the diseases, not the holistic person that you're dealing with, then you're really missing an opportunity there. So it's important that we have, good teachers and good, kind of people who motivate and inspire you as part of the medical curriculum when it comes to social and preventive medicine. That's really the starting point. So if you really study the social and preventive medicine well, what we will learn is that even treatment is a form of prevention, and particularly this applies to communicable diseases like tuberculosis, HIV, to name a couple of these diseases, where you treat a patient to make sure that they do not kind of carry or spread the disease to others. So treatment is also prevention. But you have a spectrum of prevention. So in some schools of thought, they would say a primordial, a primary, secondary, tertiary, or a quaternary prevention. To make it simplistic, I will kind of keep it as primary, secondary, and tertiary. So the primary level prevention is really the prevention of preventing the risk factors becoming diseases. So that's what you actually do in terms of the primary prevention. But in secondary prevention, it's about the early diagnosis and treatment. So that's the secondary part. And the tertiary prevention is that after the disease has come in, you try to limit the disease and the complications that arises out of it. And as an add-on to it, those who have the disease and do develop some kind of a disability, you make sure that they are rehabilitated to be able to get back to as normal as possible. So you have a spectrum of prevention. So the clinicians often come at the secondary level and the tertiary level of prevention. And the large aspect is basically the secondary aspect of it, an early diagnosis and treatment. But you have multiple other professionals who have a very important role in the primary setting, as well as in the case of the tertiary slash the quaternary part, which becomes more rehabilitation in terms of caregiving and so on. So the primary level, you have multiple actors. And these actors look upon on clinicians to be able to capacitate them and also provide them with the right kind of evidence and knowledge. Who better than teachers to be able to reach school students, or social workers who go home to home and reach people with information, vaccinators who do the vaccinations. So you have a lot of kind of actors who kind of really be the support mechanism around the clinicians to be able to take the full spectrum of preventive activities. But the realization is important. But if the physician just restricts themselves to the diagnosis and the treatment part, which seems the more fancier part, that's a mind shift that needs to be changed very early on before they settle into the career. So public health education as part of the medical curriculum becomes extremely important. Specialization is somebody who really wants to focus on that, but that's too late. So it has to happen much earlier. And that's why in many parts of the world, there is also a call to make primary healthcare and public health knowledge aware, even in your schooling times, to be able to understand the principles of public health.
Why do you think that in the 20th century we separated the two with such a wide gap in education and institutions and governments? Why did this happen?
I think the most important aspect is the drive for capitalism and the commercialization of medicine. So which was a kind of a very recent development in that sense. So the public sector, which should have been the main driver of provider of education and health services, kind of gave way or space to the private sector in that it did not keep up to the quality and the demands of people. And then comes the pressure of the commercial side of medicine with the pressure from the pharma sector, with the new medicines coming up, billions of dollars kind of spent in research, and governments kind of really willing to give that space to the private sector. I'm not against the privatization, but it's really about a balance. There should be a healthy competition between the public sector and the private sector at all times. So, and therefore, it was, probably at that stage where the public sector took a back seat and gave way to the private sector to dominate, healthcare. I think it was a tipping point. And to add it all with the whole managed care and the role of insurance companies coming in and the whole commercialization of medicine that actually happened has kind of really taken that apart.
Yeah, and you know what? But I think it's important to mention that, we've been bragging for the past decades that our life expectancy has gone up over the past decades. Although now in the US and the UK, the life expectancy didn't grow.
Has dipped a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, but nevertheless, we still attribute this extension in life expectation to allopathic medicine and more pharmaceutical drugs. But basically, what we have shown is that it's basically more preventive medicine, social medicine, and just basic infrastructure, avoiding child mortality and other things. And I think that's a very important point, because in terms of culture, we still believe that more technology and more pills is what's bringing us to more longevity, more longevity. But it's rather the public preventive side of it that it's really making the big changes.
Absolutely. So if you really look at the impact of the various public health interventions over time that have actually made a significant impact in terms of the life expectancy at birth. So just for simplistic purposes, in terms of quantification, around 80% of the contribution actually comes from behavior change and improvement in lifestyle and the addressing of the social determinants of health. Only less than 20% contribution comes actually from the medicines and the drugs and the pills. So that kind of awareness is extremely critical. And nothing like vaccination and water and sanitation improvements that have actually happened have cut down the kind of diseases that people were losing lives to. So, but now comes a completely different challenge with the rise of non-communicable diseases. And where we see is an equivalent of a vaccine and an equivalent of the social determinants that, in terms of communicable diseases, it's basically the lifestyles which are having an impact clearly on the non-communicable diseases. And the fact that the places that we are seeing a small dip in the life expectancy at birth is basically because of the deteriorating lifestyles. So you see the previous generations probably even had a much healthier lifestyles than the successive generations. So therefore, just as an equivalent of the vaccination movement that happened, we need a lifestyle movement when it comes to non-communicable diseases.
Yeah, we'll go there, definitely. But I've been a bit frustrated because in the past years I've been reading so much. There are a lot of papers from JAMA, from the Lancet, from the World Health Organization, pointing to this fact that the big part of the pie comes from lifestyle and from preventive and social approach to health, and not the pharmaceutical and the medical, which is okay, but that's not really driving communicable disease. And it seems that the information is there, but it's not really permeating into government policies or even the regulation. How do you feel this disconnect is growing or not growing? And what are the causes for this to be happening? Because information, it's so clear, it's so easy to see.
Yeah. A lot of times, information and evidence, even if it is there, and that's why, you kind of asked the question very early on in terms of the politicization element that comes in. So the fact is, and COVID-19 was also a classic example in which the science would kind of, take you to one side, but then the political decisions were not necessarily based on science in many instances, right? So therefore, it's also a lot of individualism also comes in, and there is a kind of a deep-rooted suspicion about the system, and whom to trust and not trust becomes also a challenge for the people. There is this famous study, the Edelman Trust Barometer. You actually, the most recent report says that people are not trusting the governments for information in many instances. And they're also not trusting the media, which has also kind of changed over time in its goals, and also with the opening of social media. So false news, misinformation, disinformation tends to spread pretty fast. So therefore, people are also very confused in terms of the sources to trust. So the thing is, the fact is, it should be a kind of a dialogue involving the governments and the scientists to be able to be very clear in terms of communicating to people. So openness, transparency, and the limitations should be explained to people. The science cannot be withheld for the sake of for the lack of resources to be able to attain that. So what I mean really is that to agree on a package that is affordable. So the basic principles of primary healthcare and public health is in terms of making services available, accessible, affordable, and of quality. So in order to achieve that, within the available resources, what is the optimum package that can come in? But being open and transparent to say, if we had more money, we would have actually done this, right? And in order to do that, so we need so much resources. And that's where there is also a responsibility for the richer countries to be able to provide support to those countries which lack those resources and to reward that awareness and transparency and openness. But again, as you know, in COVID-19, there was a lot of stocking of the vaccines by the richer countries, while the poorer countries did not have access to vaccines. The vaccine inequity is one such example.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's sad because, you know, commercial interests, and it's not that we're against the privatization of parts of healthcare,
Right.
but sometimes the science comes very attached to the way we produce that science and who's financing those studies and who's putting that information forward. And I think that
Right.
this adds a lot to the complexity. And I think another example, you've already mentioned marginalized societies. And I met you a few weeks ago in Qatar. You were giving a talk on lifestyle, but you took a different approach, or not a different approach, but a new approach in terms of when we hear about lifestyle. You talked about engendering lifestyle, you know, and you talked about the epistemological and the even ontological asymmetries that we've built for the female body in our culture, in our science, in our technology. And lifestyle and women have been basically been relegated to reproductive medicine or reproductive health. How is this issue of gender in lifestyle so you know, we're so blind to it, first of all. And then once we open the eyes, how can we see that it's undervalued, undermined, underestimated, under-researched, and underdiagnosed?
Right. No, absolutely, Victor. I think it's just a reflection of the prevailing gender inequality in a society. And it extends to almost every single kind of domain or the system. It's so percolated within the society. And one recent study of the UN Women actually said it would take a minimum of another 300 years before we achieve a gender equal society. And there were more data emerging as well. More recently, the UN Development Program came out with an excellent index, two indices at the same time. One called as the Women Empowerment Index, and another on the Gender Parity Index. So if you really look at the Women Empowerment and the Gender Parity Index globally, what you actually observe is that there is over 90% of women in the world live in countries with low level of women empowerment, or medium or low levels of gender parity. So 90%, a staggering 90%. Only 1% of the women actually live in countries with a high level of gender parity and high levels of women empowerment. So therefore, we really, looking at situations where this is a systemic issue, and this is a global issue. So and no sector is kind of being able to address that inequality. And health, you can see the disparity more striking, and the data has been kind of known for a while. So we seem to be getting better and better data of establishing this particular fact. So therefore, it's some sector has to show the way, and it can be done. And therefore, the health sector has a wonderful opportunity now. So with the emergence of lifestyle medicine has the opportunity now to learn from the allopathic medicine in terms of how it has systematically kind of neglected gender equality and giving women the right kind of status. And therefore, lifestyle medicine is strategically positioned at this point of time to fill that gap. And what we really are looking at in terms of women's specific packages. So when we're really looking at nutrition as a pillar of lifestyle medicine, so we are not having generic recommendations for men and women, but really trying to understand the different phases that a woman is in, not just a simple classification of men and women, but even among the women in terms of the different needs during different physiologic stages. So when it comes to physical activity, looking at how certain cultures and religious barriers that women may have in terms of physical activities, and then provide kind of suggestions or solutions that are culture sensitive and religious sensitive in case of physical activity. So similarly, in terms of the rising, substance use and the kind of counseling that women will need and the support that they will need in terms of getting, out of the substance use as a specific instance. But similarly, for all the pillars of lifestyle medicine, there needs to be a full understanding that the women's needs are quite different. And these needs even vary depending on the life course or the stage that they are in. So that sensitivity, if is there, it'll go a long way in terms of bridging the prevailing gender inequality. And once lifestyle medicine is able to demonstrate that and clearly kind of show the impact that it has, it's likely to spread into the broader health system. Allopathic medicine can learn from lifestyle medicine, and even the other sectors can actually learn from the health sectors as we expand.
This is beautiful. And, this is yet another example of this disparity between let's say that we prescribe lifestyle medicine as an individual solution, but rather see lifestyle medicine as a systemic issue and a preventive social approach. And basically, women is more than half of the world's population. And it would make much more sense to not to shift gears, but to expand the gears of the lifestyle medicine effort, and not only focusing on giving this advice on the individual level, but rather on showing how these disparities, not only in this sector, but in all of the other sectors. And you mentioned a 300 years time horizon, which in a sense for me, when I hit 300 years, it's sometimes before it felt like, no, it's too long, we will be dead by then, there's no time for that. But on the other sense is that we've been building these systems for hundreds of years. We cannot change them overnight, even if we have a beautiful documentary showing in all the cinemas in the world, So how do you think about these long-term time horizons with health and capitalism and all these things that we know they're very complex issues like refugees and income inequality? And as a human species, how can we really bet on those time horizons? And it's not being irresponsible, but probably more responsible.
Right. This is a great question. Really, the future is in the hands of young people, as you always say, right? So it should be a generational shift and change that should happen. And what we should be calling for is a greater sensitization of younger people on and where we are headed. So it's of course the starting point is in terms of a longer term vision. So you have to look at those people, the ones that can actually bring about a change over a period of time and then carry it on in the successive generations. So focusing on young people, catching them young, and schools become a very important location for the intervention of sensitizing them in terms of gender equality. You see many of the ads globally in terms of kind of mentioning who is a real man. The real man respects women, understands gender equality, stands for gender equality, and also every man has to, or a young man needs to be a pro-feminist and understand the other sex and what their needs are and be receptive to it. So young people in general and young men in general will be the starting point for me in terms of the sensitization process. And at the same time, young girls should stand up for themselves. They should be very clear about what their rights are, and they should be empowered and equipped to be with the right kind of knowledge and the skills to be able to stand up for themselves. So this is the young kind of movement that you need to bring in. But at the same time, we also need a good kind of an approach in terms of a legal framework, a regulatory framework, also to be able to support and make the systems more equitable, and in terms of supporting women and making sure that their needs are systematically kind of met. So therefore, it will be a combination of education and sensitization of the younger generation, but also bringing in the aspects around regulation and legislation and friendly policies, which kind of really take it towards taking a women-centered approach. So yeah, these are some of the ways that we can go about.
How do you deal with feeling so small, so impotent about this big thing that needs to happen. Like, so many, I think we have a very good grasp of the things that need to happen over the course of the next decades. The task seems so big, and there's enough reasons why, hope can be wiped out, because just this conversation where we take 30 minutes of our time to go deep into a topic, and it's scarce, in terms of time, in terms of attention, in terms of available information, in terms of, how you personally deal and the narrative you use to be able to wake up every morning and just smile and go and move.
Yeah, I think we have to believe that we can actually make a difference, right? So, and the difference starts at an individual level. I have two daughters, and both daughters are in college at this moment. And I'm really, I adore them when they speak up for themselves, when they talk about their rights, so not just their rights, but also rights of women and girls in general. So at least I feel that I have done my part as a parent in providing that platform for my two daughters to be able to bring themselves out in a way. So therefore, what I'm able to do at a personal level with my daughters, I believe that it's also possible to do if I inspire the communities out there to be able to take up that as a responsibility, and to make sure that they empower their women and empower their daughters to be able to come to that level. But at the same time, also make sure that their boys understand and respect girls. And that kind of a role as a parent becomes important. But in terms of my job, we really have to look at opportunities and look at creative options, basically, to be able to take programs to scale. We are not talking about small projects of here and there with a lot of resources, but everything that you do, you have to be creative and to think about how can you take an approach or a program to scale, and how you can sustain it over a long period of time. So that creativity and that eagerness to make a difference, and also to a responsibility of what I'm able to do with my daughters, the world should be able to do to everyone, to every single girl out there, then becomes a drive, a force that you use to motivate yourself to, kind of take it to that level.
Yeah, I love this answer, and I've been through a rough week. Last week I was in Vandana Shiva.
Right.
Yeah, we were in an event. She was here in Mexico, and in the middle of her conference, I had an anxiety attack. She was describing this situation in India where so many people who worked in the fields and in agriculture had to commit suicide because Monsanto was patenting the seeds. They weren't allowing them to store the seeds for the next harvest. The soil became eroded, and they lost their livelihood. It was a big thing, and the anxiety obviously came because of all this suffering, but it also came because we have like two different worldviews, and people from one side and the other side, they're not bad, they're not corrupt, they're not, there are some of them are corrupt, some of them are whatever, but mainly people really trying to do things as the system tells them that the world works. And actually, in this specific week, I've been very, like, I don't know, probably that's why I got sick too, because my mind couldn't really understand how, and in a sense, it does lose hope. And I think that's a paradox of our system. It's even a tragedy of the system, but that you don't feel that you make a difference. And that's so pervasive. And so, it gets you to a point of cynicism and indifference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Now I empathize with you. I'm so sorry that, you had to go through that, but the thing is, you have to ask yourself, if not us, who else? So therefore, we have to kind of drive. So every time, and I really, I kind of like when people say you never fail, you fall, and then you get back. Right. So there will be days such as these when you feel down, but then you have to pick up your energy for the people whom you're here to serve. And therefore we have to continue to generate new ideas every time. So that energy has to be drawn from inside to be able to make a difference. So yeah.
I agree. I agree. And that's why I usually think in terms of how artists think,
Right.
in terms of the process, not just the end or what
Absolutely.
happens later. And that's a radical thing to do in a system where we are so pushed to outcomes. Um,
Yeah.
I really felt when I heard you the first time, I felt so inspired by you because you started your presentation and said, this is a personal conversation. This is a personal presentation. And you were talking about big numbers and big facts, but you were talking about yourself, your life, your
Yeah.
experiences, your outlook on life. And I think that's also very needed because even in big institutions where you take part of a huge institution, it's composed by people, by individuals who are,
Yeah.
so beautiful. How do you think this narrative of using our own experiences, our own life, our own hopes and dreams, in shaping narratives for the big institutions, governments, cultural, and all those things?
You're right, Victor. So basically, as you point out, an organization is made of people, right? So people bringing in different perspectives. So, and it's a two-way kind of relationship in that between the organization and the individual. So you bring in your values, you bring in your systems, and the organization listens to it and then adapts itself as it gains more knowledge from the people who within it. And the people also learn from the organization and its culture and its values, and both shape up together. So nothing is kind of fixed and stagnant here. So it's that openness and receptiveness, and working in a multicultural environment, it makes it even more richer in that when people bring in different angles and different perspectives, and the openness of the organization to listen and adapt to the different perspectives. So I think it's extremely important. But those personal drives are extremely important. And I have a lot of colleagues who have given up their careers in the private sector, very lucrative jobs, and settled for jobs to serve people. So therefore, it's that common thinking of vision of wanting to give back to the society and to be able to serve, right? And as we know, but this is also kind of medically proven, the release of the oxytocin that comes out with that sense of worth and sense of purpose, right? So that these kind of jobs give. That's the internal drive that pushes you to go far. So yeah, so the personal motivation becomes extremely critical. Everything else becomes secondary.
Yeah, that's one of the sources of my hope is that we are coded for this communal life,
Yeah,
and we've been in the past decades, centuries, focused on the individual part of it, and we have enough distractors that all also work at the level of oxytocin and other, that distract us
mediums.
so that's that. I think we're in that point in history where there are enough reasons, or enough triggers for us to be distracted and destroy ourselves, but
Right,
also there's enough experience and felt lived experience where we can, instead of drinking a Coke, hugging someone, it's much better for everyone, and it will go to that level
yeah,
of intuition rather than just
right,
knowledge and education. And
absolutely.
I sense that in our species is in that sense, um, you know, we have all the opportunities in that
Yes.
respect, more than our ideas.
Absolutely, Victor. No, totally. So that humanity is the driver of all the work, just to understand the pain of a fellow human being and to empathize and to be able to try to do something, even if you can't do something, but at least to listen and just to, say that there is a shoulder to cry. That's a bare minimum that we should be able to do, and that only will keep the humanity going. Otherwise, there's no other purpose.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the other thing. Like community is the means, but also it's the end. So
Yeah.
we fulfill the mission by fulfilling it, and that's
Yes.
a radical thing also, um,
Absolutely.
in our system. So
Yeah.
just to start closing up this conversation, which was amazing. Thank you so much. Um, I tend never to ask these questions because I don't like seeing it this way. But when I invited you to the podcast, and the last thing that it occurred to me that I wanted to ask you is, let's think in a 50-year scenario. Let's say that we are today in 2074.
Yeah.
What would be an optimistic scenario and a not so bright scenario in terms of these syndemics that we're living, where we have animal health connected to human health, planetary health, social health, non-communicable disease, income inequality, all these things that are really intertwined and they're not separate issues.
Right.
How would you characterize two scenarios, one hopeful and one not so optimistic?
So, I kind of really have this habit of simplifying things for my own understanding. And for me, there are only two major challenges that remain in healthcare. So one is in terms of the inequity that prevails, and the second is in terms of the lack of quality of services. So these to me are the two drivers of diseases and ill health. So one, you need to have coverage of information and services. Everyone, a universal coverage for information and services should be there. And secondly, you just have to make sure that these are of the right quality. So in the best case scenario, we are really looking at an equal world. Everyone gets the same level of information and everyone gets the same level of services, and all of them are of optimum quality. So that optimum quality is definitely there, but some, of course, 100% equal world is not going to be possible. And to be a realist in that, there may be a little kind of up and down a bit, but then the optimum level should be available for everyone. So that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that the divide that we currently seeing in terms of the prevailing inequality, there is a risk of it widening further. So that's when, particularly with the emergence of technology, and again, COVID was a stark reminder to us when, in some parts of the world, the children had easy access to online education, while in other parts of the world did not have access to even internet, leave alone, any level of sophistication in terms of exchange of information. So therefore, we are at a risk of the divide being exacerbated and exaggerated. And the quality of services also, even when available, there is a risk of further compromise and the risk of the public sector further weakening and not to be able to reach the most marginalized. So this is the kind of two scenarios I'm really looking at in terms of an equal society with an optimum quality of service, or the worst case scenario of a widening inequity and with the further compromise of quality of information and services.
Do you think that this widening of the duality that we're seeing, if it goes beyond and exacerbates itself, do you think that could mean that human life um, becomes impossible, or it's just a matter that there will be millions of lives that will be disposable, life will continue, but at the cost of so many lives?
I would think there will be a serious risk of further loss of lives. So instead of the survival of the fittest, you will see the survival of the richest. So it's very possible that you will actually see, lives being lost. And now the fact that if the non-communicable diseases, the risk of it being predominant, and if there are not adequate level of care and services, then there is going to be a serious risk of premature mortality due to non-communicable diseases. So therefore, it's going to be inevitable. So the earlier we kind of understand and make sure that this inequity does not widen any further to start with, and then to bridge the gap so that we are able to provide an optimum level of services and information to everyone, the chances of kind of really success in terms of not just the increase in life expectancy at birth, but also in terms of improvement in the quality of life will also be, and the overall productivity and happiness in a society can be contributed by this careful understanding and planning and execution of those plans.
Thank you, my friend. I think we sometimes forget that, we it's a matter of luck, or exactly where you were born, in which family, in which race, in which country, and we sometimes forget that, and the system
Right.
tells us that it was our own merit, and so many conflicts arise from that lie, that it's very sad. To conclude this conversation, what's your plan for the next few years? What motivates you, and what makes you smile?
So, I wear a dual hat in that, I have a deep academic interest, but I also have an interest in to practice what I continue to learn. So I'm a practitioner, a public health practitioner, but I also am an academic. So I want to kind of really link the two. So the more I learn from my practice, and I want to bring it into the academic world. And there is an overt movement globally also in terms of bridging that gap between academia and public health practice. So as I move on, I kind of really want to bring the two together as closely as possible. So when I identify a problem, so I would like to first, do more intensive research to understand the root causes of the problem, and then be able to convert that into some kind of solutions, and then implement the solutions through my practice hat, and then use the academic hat again to understand, as an implementation research, to see how it works, and even if it doesn't work, to come out and then keep publishing that for the world to learn from. And I also, in the academic side of things, I also want to continue to inspire many public health practitioners, and in the future, and the younger generation, to take up public health as a career. Not necessarily only clinicians to take up such a career, but anyone interested in public health to be able to take up the public health career. So, but basically the response to your question is, I want to continue what I'm doing, but trying to see how I can kind of really contribute and contribute to further bridging the gap between the academia and the public health practice.
Beautiful, beautiful, my friend. Thank you so much. You've inspired me, in not only your words and your wisdom, but also, I don't know, I sense an holistic being that is here to help us heal and to keep building this loving community. So thank you so much for what you're doing, and
Thank you, Victor. No, the feeling is mutual, right? The very first time we met, we developed an instant kind of a connection. You're doing a great job, and your volunteer spirit, and the urge to make a difference and contribute to the society. You are a role model in yourself, and I feel proud to have known you. And thanks so much for the conversation.
Me too. Me too. I feel very proud to have known you, and I'm very excited to see what's coming next. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Victor. We'll be in touch.
We'll be in touch. Thank you, my friend.
Very good. Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye.